Okay. I wish to call to order the regular meeting of council on June 23rd at 3:30 p.m. Council would like to acknowledge the Ukluathot First Nation on whose traditional territories the District of Ucluelet operates. Notice of video recording. Audience members and delegates are advised that this proceeding is being video recorded and broadcast on YouTube. Delegates and meeting participants are also advised that this meeting is being conducted via Zoom, which may store data on foreign servers. Any additions to the agenda? Hearing and seeing none. Looking for the approval of the agenda. Councillor Cole, second by Councillor Hoare. All in favor? Opposed, carried. Thank you. Looking for the adoption of the minutes from June 9th, regular minutes. Councillor Kemps, second by Councillor McEwen. Any errors or omissions? Councillor Hoare.
Just a minor one on agenda page 8. Third line down, I do believe it should be walking tours, not whaling tours.
Okay. I'm so jealous when you point out the editing mistakes.
Just for you, Mako.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Hearing and seeing no others. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Any unfinished business? Hearing and seeing none. Mayor's announcements. Just a couple things. First one is just a grad class 2020. I think everybody, it was a great, wonderful turnout down the streets. At first everybody thought it was going to be, we were feeling that it was going to be a negative change for the kids, but speaking with some of the parents, it sounded like the new venue was well received inside the hall, and it was great to see the community turnout throughout the whole community. So again, just a big shout out to the class of 2020, and it was great to see that. The other one is the summer program guide tomorrow morning. The Parks and Rec Department have come up some creative activities for the youth in the community. So registration starts tomorrow at 9 a.m. So I'm assuming there'll be a bit of a lineup. There is some online and things like gymnastics and yoga classes, things in soccer camp. Some of those are going to be online here, and which is great to see that. I'd also like to report out that we've just come up with our Barclay Community Forest appointments for the year of for the next year up to 2021, which will be again Dario Corzoli, Donna Monteith, and James Costello. They've been active on the board for the last 12 months, doing a lot of great work, and we decided that as a group that we'll continue on that trend for another 12 months. And a big shout out to those that did apply, and we appreciate your application. Public input. Mr. Rosenberg, are there any questions from the public? Okay, thank you, sir. We have one correspondence item, the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust 2019 Annual Report. Any questions or comments from any of the councillors? I just had one comment, if I don't mind. Oh, Councillor McEwen, go ahead.
Thank you. I just found the information on page 22. The 2019 grants by numbers was really an interest. Well, the whole report was an interesting read, but it's really amazing how much funding they provide for groups in our region. Kudos to them.
Great, it's wonderful. Yeah, no, I just a couple comments. I love to see the work. I just on page 17, if you could all flip to that, just regarding the board of directors. I know that the CBT does appoint their own directors to go on there, but it does have Mr. Lyons as a District of Ucluelet And for me, and maybe just have a little bit of dialogue about that, it's the report's wonderful, but I don't want to break it apart. But it does appear that Jeff Lyons is a District of Ucluelet representative, and wondering your thoughts as a whole on that one. Councillor Cole, if you don't mind.
Yep, I think the way that the words read are he's the representative for the area of Ucluelet, or you could read it, he's the representative for the District of Ucluelet. It's it kind of, you can read it both ways. I totally understand where you're coming from. But when you look across the board, they are all, I think they've kind of tried to put symmetry to it as far as how it reads. So I don't know if, I understand what you're saying, that it might look like he is an employee of the District of Ucluelet and not the representative from the area of the District of Ucluelet for the CBT.
And that was it. I know that you go back to Rebecca, or back to that in your next meeting. It's just, and I don't want to discredit what Mr. Lyons is doing there. It's just, again, it's some of the actions may be reflective and may represent. Some people could think that it truly represents the pulse of this council. So I just want to make sure that that's being addressed. But thank you. Information items, none. We'll go to council committee reports, and starting with Councillor McEwen.
That came up fast.
It did. I'm sorry. I think the second half of the council meeting is going to get a bit slower.
I think so too. 300 pages of it. So I did attend the Wapsipick Trail meeting June 10th. And I know Councillor Hoare did as well, so we'll probably tag team on this. There was some really good news. On Friday, the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust approved a $3,750 grant to assist the trail with their Learn Where You Live series of educational videos. And episode 5 of those videos, The Remarkable Ravens, was released on Friday as well. So if anybody hasn't had a chance to look at these educational videos, I definitely recommend it. And then a bit of not so great news. They were hoping to have the Spring Cove section ribbon cutting fairly soon, but the manager of Culture and Heritage with YFN has put a small section on hold because of 500 meters of archaeological site that needs to have an archaeological survey done first. So they're thinking that that's going to take some time with the COVID thing going on. So probably late fall, that section will be open. And they're also anticipating with the project at Amphitrite Lighthouse, the Lightkeeper's House, that they may request an archaeological survey be done at that site as well before anything gets going. So some great news and then some not so great news, but that was it for me. Oh, and then we all attended the Committee of the Whole meeting on June 16th, where all our societies came to speak to us via Zoom. And there were 18 represented, so that was a good cross-section, and really interesting to hear what they've all been doing and how they've all been managing with all the changes with the pandemic going on. And some of them are doing really well, actually, virtually. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor McEwen? Okay, Councillor Kemps.
Thank you. So I'm happy to report that there's funding coming to our region. So I've just got word that CBT assisted with the delivery of the emergency community response. So the CARE Network and WCRS and Forest Glen received some funding. And also, I'm really happy to announce that through the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund through Community Futures, that the Chamber, we put a grant together through the region chambers through Tofino, Ucluelet, and Port Alberni, and we received some funding from that as well. So, and I've been attending the weekly recovery task force meetings, and on a not so great note, the chamber had to make the unfortunate decision to cancel the marathon this year. So just because it doesn't look like we're going to get past the 50 max capacity for group events. So I had to make that decision the other day. So unfortunately, but looking
Sorry to
forward
hear
to
that.
the new one for sure. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any questions for Councillor Kemps? Councillor Hoare?
Not a lot. I was, as Councillor McEwen said, on the Wild Pacific Trail meeting. And I wanted to point something out about that Live Where You Live, Love Where You Learn Where You Live series. Good gracious. Tired. It's been a long day. There are so far 5 videos. There will be 7. And Tanya, the trail naturalist, is submitting one of them to the National Association of Interpretation, and they have awards for this sort of thing. So take a look at them and write a little note, what's your favorite, because she wants input on which one to submit. Personally very fond of the Remarkable Ravens. If you haven't seen it, there's something about Carl Sieber balking like a raven that is worth watching it for. Committee of the Whole has been touched on, which was interesting. The grab parade was fabulous. Would have been nice if the wind wasn't blowing into my face, because all those bubbles were supposed to go across the street, for the grads. But on a not so light note, because of my job, I am seeing a lot of tourists, a lot of them, and they are not following social distancing, and they are not following any of the requests that we have made. So I spend my day pointing out the arrows on the floor at work, backing away from people when they come up and tap me on the shoulder. We have had a lot of tourists coming in like right at 9 a.m. when we open, and 9 to 10 is for the elders and first responders and the immunocompromised. So that's a bit of an issue. We're working on getting someone on the door. There was a bit of a mess up this week, and so we are sort of down an extra person. So it's a little bit tricky. So just a comment to Lara, maybe to pass on to Denise, just making sure that when TU is getting their messaging out, that people are aware that we're open for the general public from 10 o'clock to 7, not 9 to 7. Beyond that, mask up, because they're here and they're here from everywhere. And I want you all staying healthy. We
all do. I'm just going to piggyback on your last comment there before I get to Councillor Cole. Yeah, and I think, you see that. I just really, some of the things that, Tourism Ucluelet is doing is ensuring that, the residents, the tourists that are coming to the area to go to that discoveryucluelet.com. In that very top, they have the COVID-19 messaging. So I know things like the co-op, and then things like not just the mask, but the hours, but also the fact is, don't bring your family of 5 in there. So we're just trying to get that kind of messaging out. So, but feel free, don't wait for the council. I know that you got Denise's information. If you see some stuff, Councillor Hoare, just please send her an email with, and then because that document is a live document and we're always updating it. I think recently we just added the whole, have your dogs leashed as you come to the community. So live document. If any of you see things I'd like to see on the document, just send her a message.
For sure. I've been meaning to get in touch with her, and it's been a busy few days.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you for that. Councillor Cole.
So all I have left that hasn't been said is the ACRD. Takeaway for the West Coast was the change in the landfill hours. So starting next Monday, it'll be just 10 to 4 and closed on Saturday and Sunday, except for they're going to stay open later on Wednesday. Wednesdays, instead of 10 to 4, it's going to be 12 to 6. So that because the people who, and hoping to catch some of the people who only have weekends off, hopefully they have the first part of their evening off that they could utilize it then if they need to. Yeah, that's my highlight, garbage.
But hey, since you're talking about garbage, how is the ACRD going to wait for feedback if, is that just, are they planning to just do a 60 or 90-day term and then assessing it again?
So they basically, with the quote, in the release was $180,000 of revenues that was reduced with that. So what the statement was, pandemic resulting in reduced waste and revenues of up to $180,000. So in the short term, they haven't put a date. They didn't state a date when we talked about it. I thought, I certainly lobbied for the later hours if they were going to close on weekends, but to review it, I think that probably comes after we get to the next stage and see how things are going.
Okay.
But I can get back to you if they have a firm deadline that they're going to throw it on the agenda again and revisit it.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions for Councillor Cole? None. For myself, obviously, regional meetings continue with our communities on the West Coast. Those are weekly. Obviously, there is obviously we're at phase 2, but it feels like we're more at phase 2.7. As we're getting into phase 3, we're all anticipating that that's a message that's going to be coming from the ministry and the premier here. So as that goes, those weekly phone calls that we continue to have with the ministers, and we're on track for something like that. The biggest job for me right now is to ensure that all the communities are being heard, and the activities that are permitted or not being permitted. Again, working with Tourism Equivalent and making sure that if there is some messaging that needs to go out broader than that we can help them with, and then we're doing that. And I know that's been a good partnership so far. And the task force that meets on Thursday, there's lots of good things coming out of that. And I want to just really thank again the society's meeting that we had last week. I hope that you're all supportive of the format. I still like this format of hearing them a couple times a year as a group. Just a correction, Councillor McEwen, yes, although there was 18 there, a couple of them had 2 hats on. So I think we actually had more like 21 societies, and which is great. And that's all I have to report on. No tough questions for me? Okay, good. We have a few reports. We'll start with report 13.1, District of Ucluelet Flood Mapping Project. Mr. Gregg.
Thank you, through the mayor. This project was, as council may recall, was funded in 2019. We received a grant from the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund through UBCM for allowing the district to do some flood mapping. And this is for both storm surge type floods along our coastline as well as tsunami. So the grant funded 100% of consultant costs for this project, which is fantastic. And we've been working with our consulting team, which is Ebwater Consulting and Cascadia Coast Research, to bring the project to completion. And we're sliding into the home plate here to be complete by the end of June. Just very briefly, the results, with the purpose of this project is really, this is the science, to have a clear and better picture of what flood risks may exist. And really there will be some follow-up work and considerations for the district to do. Things like emergency preparedness plans and infrastructure and asset, sort of planning for their resilience, looking at flood construction levels or development permit areas, those sorts of things. That's further work that can build on this foundation of the study that's been done here. So really, this better information that will be presented here today is really can allow us to minimize risk on existing properties over time and also avoid risk in future developments to keep the community safe. A couple of things that the report that's on your agenda touches on is one is the advisability of making all the project information publicly available, and we've already begun creating a website to make all of the information available. We had intended to have an open house, but to avoid creating a large gathering, instead we've given some thought to creating a public display that people can kind of come in ones and twos and have it up over a long period of time, so people can take their time to read the information, see the mapping, and inform themselves, but also to put all of that up on our website. And also one of the recommendations is to share with our neighbors that the extents of the mapping, as we realize this project involved modeling the whole inlet of the Euclid Inlet, and so in doing that, it just made sense to be mapping what are the flood hazards or risks around the whole shoreline. So that is information that is of great interest to the Area C and the ACRD in particular, and the Ucluelet First Nation at Itatsu, and how it would affect that side of the inlet. So the recommendations are also around sharing that information, and they're keen to see it from our previous conversations. But I think we can come back to the recommendations for council to consider that are at the outset of the report. But sort of first and most importantly, I think my job here is to introduce and frankly express a little bit of appreciation for our consulting team and the kind of amazing work that they do. It's been really something to see how the process unfolds and sort of watch the experts at work. So if there are any questions from council, I can certainly take them now. But I believe, hopefully, we have Tamsin Lyle. I'm giving you the thumbs up. Is online. She's a principal with Ebwater Consulting, and she'll be presenting the project and explaining the results to council. So if there aren't any questions at this point, but I just, after the presentation, we can sort of come back to the council recommendations if there's any questions about those.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Well, welcome. What was your first name, sorry?
Tamsin. It's a bit of an odd one.
Tamsin.
S-I-N. Focus on the sin.
Tamsin. Well, welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Council. It's I was really excited about getting a trip to Ucluelet, and this isn't quite the same. So I'm sorry not to be there. I'm really excited to present this work to you. And I think we have some slides, which hopefully will be popping up. But yeah, so my name's Tamsin. I'm the principal engineer at Ebwater Consulting. We're based here in Vancouver, and we worked on this project over the last 6 or 7 months, working with a larger team. I've got about 5 engineers and scientists who work with me, as well as our sub-consulting team, Cascadia Coast Research, and they're really the brains of some of the big coastal modeling that got done and that we then turned into maps. And so I want to just acknowledge that this is a much larger team and lots of people have had their fingers on this project, and it was a super fun one for us. Slide, please. And so I think what I wanted to go through today was the why we're doing this, the what we found, the so what and the now what. We can go back to that last slide. In terms of the flood, the why I think is pretty obvious. You all live there, you see these big storms. This is a great image that was provided to us by you folks from January of last year. You probably remember this fairly significant storm. You nodding? It was a big one, lots of big waves, etc., that came on in. And so that's obviously something that's very present for you. There's also tsunami threat on the coast, which you I'm sure are aware of. There are tsunamis that are happening all the time. It's just a matter of how big they are and what that looks like on the coast. And so this project was really, the why of this project, I think, is pretty obvious. And so if you get the next slide. So as Bruce was just saying, the real intent of this work is to lay the foundation so that moving forward, Ucluelet has an opportunity to reduce its risk over time. And you can't really reduce your risk without understanding it first, so you can target your efforts and make really good decisions. And to get to the point of understanding your risk, you actually first need to understand the hazard. And so I like this. This is a good framing of risk, which is a triangle. And think about the inside of that triangle as being your risk. And it has 3 sides to it. the hazard, the bad thing. In this case, we're looking at coastal floods and tsunamis, as well as exposure. So that's what's in the way of that bad thing, and the vulnerability or susceptibility of that element to a flood. And so before we can really understand risk and we're trying to reduce it and try and shrink the size of that triangle, we really need to understand the hazard. And so that is what this project was focused on, is that sort of foundational piece of understanding how much water, where that water is going to be, how often it's going to be there. So next slide. So obviously, I think you guys know about this. You live on the coast and you've been working towards this for a while. And as Bruce said, you've made some great steps here in terms of getting the good data that supported this project, as well as going out to get funding to do this work. And that's where we come in. So next slide, please. I got to advance my own slides over here so I know what I'm doing too. Next slide. So in terms of the project objectives, we kind of have a bit of a two-pronged approach here. One was to do the best we could and do the best available science in terms of figuring out what that water looks like as it comes on shore, how much there's going to be, how often it's going to be there, how deep it's going to be, how fast it's going to be moving, for both storm events, which you're very familiar with, and tsunami events, which you're probably less familiar with, for the present day, as well as in future with sea level rise, which is something that you as a coastal community will be facing, of course. So with all of that science, that's one part of the problem, but the second part is really using that science. If you have all the science, there's no point having it unless we're actually going to use it. And so the second objective was to create some solid mapping outputs and deliverables, so that your team at the district can go ahead and make some really solid decisions moving forward to hopefully reduce your risk over time. Next slide, please. So in terms of a timeline, Bruce gave you a bit of it there. So we came on board in about November of last year, through to now, and we're just wrapping up. We're trying to tie up a few loose ends because we're not doing that public meeting. So we're trying to figure out a way to manage that. But we've been at this pretty hard since late fall, gathering data, doing a lot of number crunching in terms of the modeling with our sub consultant Cascadia Coast Research. Our team came out and did a nice tour with your staff to get an idea of some of the local areas where the trouble spots. And then we've been crunching reports and maps and things ever since. And here we are today presenting the results. So I did want to point out that it was a very compressed timeline. Normally this type of work takes quite a lot longer. But the reason that we were able to do this was definitely in the spirit of the collaboration along the Ucluelet Peninsula. So we were able to leverage a lot of work that Fino had done 2 years ago to support this work. And so that really enabled us to do this quite quickly. So in that theme, next slide, please. That's a good segue there. I think sort of using that as a starting point, and it was very, we got clear direction from the district that it was important that the project area was bigger than the district itself and included the east side of the inlet, because it just made sense. Especially, it also makes sense from a hydrodynamic perspective. We can't model half the inlet without the other half of the inlet. We won't understand how the water goes up and down very well. So that was important. So the project area is larger than the district of Ucluelet, and you'll see that reflected in some of the maps that we're going to show you in a minute. Next slide, please. So as I've kind of been working up to this, a bit of a story here. Floods are not just floods. They're not just binary. They're not just there. They have a lot of characteristics to them. And it's very important to understand all of those different characteristics because it really affects both the impacts of the flood, but also secondly, the actions you can take to reduce your risk from the floods. So for example, they can be deep or shallow. And I think you probably know, you see the tides come in every day, shallow. Deep water, I read a really interesting paper this morning, which I think really speaks to this about the financial implications of the mental health effects of flooding on a home. And they're about 5 times bigger when you go from 30 centimeters to a meter of water. So depth really matters in terms of the damage and what that means to individuals. Fast and slow, obviously, can pick up debris, can be more damaging if it's faster moving water. Frequent or rare, if it's happening every day, then it's something that you tend to naturally adapt to versus rare scenarios, which is something that can be a bit scary to understand. Sometimes you get warnings, sometimes you don't. So for your coastal storms, we know they happen in the winter. You generally get a week sort of notice that something big is coming in, and then you have a few days in terms of actually understanding it. Whereas on the flip side, we have something like a tsunami where we're going to have effectively no notice that it's going to happen, about 30 minutes or so, 20 to 30 minutes. They can last short or long. So all of these characteristics really sort of play into the impacts. And so our project really tried to understand all of these things to support good decision-making going forward so that you're acting on the right type of floods. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we actually did, the big two things we looked at were the two types of events that are added on top of the things that you normally see, which are the tides. So we looked at coastal storms from those large winter events that come in, as well as tsunamis. And then we also added on to all of this sea level rise, because that is something that is slowly affecting the base water level as we move forward. We did not look at any river or pluvial flooding or creek flooding. You don't have any rivers, so that one's really easy, big no, but did look at any sort of localized flooding related to large rain events or anything related to any sewer systems. We did take a preliminary cut at looking at the erosion that would occur as a result of the coastal flooding, which is something that's a big concern for sure as the coast is hammered in different ways with sea level rise and different types of storms. What does that mean in terms of what might be eroding away? So next slide, please. So I'm going to kind of ease you into this story, starting with the coastal storm, because the maps are a little less startling. So we're going to start with those big winter events that you all know well, I am sure. I imagine that most of you, next slide please, are people who play in the water and perhaps don't need to be told all the parts of the ocean. But what we're worried about when we're getting to flooding is really what the total water level is, how high and deep that water is. And that is determined by a bunch of different things adding up on top of each other, some of which we completely understand and can calculate. So something like the tide, we call that the deterministic element of water level, because we know where the sun and the moon are and we can do the math and figure out what the tide is going to look like. And then there's all of this other bundle of stuff, which we call the residuals. And these are things that we don't know when they're going to occur. What we do know is approximately how often they will occur. And these are the probabilistic elements. And these are further divided into two groups of the things that happen off in the deep ocean, the storm surge and the wind setup. So the storm surge is what happens when we get those low pressure systems coming in. The pressure is reduced across the ocean, and that enables the ocean to move upwards because it's not being pushed down by the atmosphere anymore. It sort of sucks up the ocean a bit. And then on top of that, we have wind setup. So when you have those long duration winds that are coming across the Pacific Ocean, the friction on top of the surface of the ocean sort of builds up and piles up the water towards the coastline. So those are the big deep water elements that we have to model and figure out so that we can calculate everything. And then there's the local effects, which are the wave effects, wave setup and wave run up. And there are slightly different mechanisms in physics here, but basically this is what happens as all of those waves come on shore. And as they start to feel the ground, they start to build up. And these are actually an incredibly important element in Ucluelet. Because of your steep, gnarly coast there's some big wave effects, and I'm sure you all live there. You've seen those big waves come in and how they run up and over the shore. So that's one of the biggest elements of concern or that is part of building that total water level in the district of Ucluelet. And then I'll add sea level rise to that story in a minute, but I'm just going to go to the next slide, please. So in terms of those probabilistic elements, so those are all of the things that are tied to the storm and not to the tides. There's a simple sort of or basic relationship in that the most frequent events tend to be quite low, and the more rare events, the more unlikely it is to occur, the higher those water levels are, because it requires that all of these bad things come together and at the same time. So it's sort of almost a gambling kind of exercise in terms of the statistics that are done. And so we have basically a correlation between the frequent events happening obviously more often and being quite low in their elevation, whereas the rare events happen less often, but can be very severe. But we need to consider all of these things when we're making decisions, because those frequent events are happening frequently. And so there can be lots of cumulative impacts, but we also need to plan for and prepare for that really rare event because we don't want to be under several meters of water. So with that in mind, I'm just going to move to the other element that we considered. In the next slide, thank you. You're on the ball with the slides. Thank you very much. Sea level rise. So this is something that we all know that is occurring around the world as a result of heating of the world, which is expanding our ocean water because it expands as it gets warmer, as well as melting glaciers and a few other elements. So we have this phenomenon that is happening. We have a very definite trend on it. And if you go to the next slide. We did have to plan for this, and you need to be planning for this in the district of Ucluelet. So the guidance currently from the province is to plan for 1 meter of sea level rise by the year 2100, 2 meters by the year 2200. However, we know those numbers are actually pretty out of date at this point. And so in our reporting, we've been quite clear that we've just sort of said that these are going to happen on the scale of 50 and 100 years. And when exactly that's going to happen, we're not sure. Yeah, sea level rise, I mean, it's definitely going to happen. I think that's something to keep in mind. And something, a good anecdote that I use is that even if we stop emitting carbon today as a globe, we're still going to see sea level rise to the year 3000 because we've locked ourselves into this situation. So this is something that we have to prepare for and plan for. The bright side for you folks, as well as myself here in Vancouver, is that the west coast of North America, relative to the rest of the world, we're doing pretty awesome just because of the way the currents work. And so our water is a bit colder so overall, so we're not expanding as much as, say, the east coast of North America. And as a bonus in Ucluelet, I don't know if you know this, but you are rising because of glacial rebound a little bit. So you're not quite keeping up with sea level rise, but Ucluelet is constantly rising by a few millimeters a year. But I suspect no one's probably noticed that because who notices a few millimeters a year? So with that in mind, next slide, please. We modeled a total of 20 different scenarios, which combine various likelihoods of occurrence with various sea level rise scenarios. So 0 meters is nominally present day through to some very far future event with 2 meters of sea level rise. And then these likelihoods on this side denote the likelihood of an event occurring in any given year. So this top one here, 7% chance of occurring in any given year or being exceeded in any given year. So that's a fair chance of occurrence. Another way of presenting that is what you more commonly hear would be a 15-year return period. So it has, on average, it'll recur every 15 years. So this is something that you would, as a community, remember an event of this size. And then it goes all the way through to some very rare events. So something that only has a 0.2% chance of occurring or being exceeded in a given year. So something much more extreme and much more rare. So we've looked at all of these things and together made 20 different scenarios to try and look at what this looks like on your coast. So in terms, next slide please, of how we actually did that, you probably don't want to know the details because it involves a lot of math and computer models, but it's pretty darn cool. First we figure out what's going on in the deep ocean using big computer models that actually extend all the way down into Washington State, as well as all the way up the coast of Vancouver Island. And then those are basically brought in. So we force all of the information out in the deep ocean and then drive it into the coast of Ucluelet, and then we even drive it into each little inlet and bay to look at how those wave effects ramp up against the coastline. That is then overlaid on top of the LiDAR information, so the good topographic information that you have available to understand flood depths, and then we turn that into some maps, which you now get to see on the next slide. So this is just an example of one of the 20 maps that's in your map atlas looking at coastal flood. This one in particular is the 0.5%, so that's the 1 in 200 year on average event. We presented this one in particular because this is the standard that's used in British Columbia for coastal design or any flooding design. So this is the normal standard that's used. And I believe this one has 1 meter of sea level rise on it as well. And so what I think is, the things that I see on this map, having spent my life looking at these types of maps, is that you're relatively well off in the grand scheme of things. Your very steep coastline means that you don't have many areas that are underwater. However, on the west coast, where you have all of that wave energy coming in and hitting those very steep coastlines, there's some pretty significant depths, in the order of 6 meters there on the outer coast. And that's very much in contrast to what you're seeing on the inlet side, which makes a lot of sense because you don't have all of that wave energy, and the coastline's a little bit shallower. And as a result, the depths of water on the inner side of the inlet are much smaller. But overall, there's not a lot of extent of flooding. There are a couple of spots, low spots, and I'm sure as residents, you recognize those as low spots and you know exactly where those are, and it makes pretty much intuitive sense. Another thing just to note is that this has been developed very specifically for each inlet and coast. So we haven't just applied a single water level across the whole thing to figure this out. So at every single inlet, a different computation was done to figure out how the water would come in there. And so it varies. If you looked at this in a 3-dimensional view, it varies in a kind of an interesting way. And it's quite intuitive because you're able to see that's where has the direct fetch of the ocean against it, and it's very, very steep at that inlet, and you can see how that would drive in. So next slide, please. One thing I wanted to give you a quick idea about was that variation, those different return periods, so the different likelihoods of events that you might see. So this map shows a difference between what is a very frequent event, so the 6-7% or the 1 in 15-year event, versus the much more extreme and rare event, that 0.5% event. And so what you can see here in this map is that on the inner coast, because it's really steep and the waves don't have a big effect once you're on the inside of the coast, there's very little difference between these rare and frequent events. And so I think that speaks a lot to how you would plan for and design for those areas, because you're not dealing with these rare, very large events. You're dealing with very similar events under all scenarios. Whereas completely opposite on the outer coast, it makes a really big difference how big that storm is. And I think it's pretty intuitive for anyone who lives on a coast. The bigger the storm, the bigger it slams into the inlet or onto the peninsula rather. The bigger those waves. And so that speaks again to how you would potentially manage this into the future. Next slide, please. So on the other measure, so we had that little matrix up at the beginning in terms of different likelihoods as well as different sea level rise. The other measure we're looking at is different sea level rises. And so here again, because of your very steep coast, if we look at what areas would be flooded today versus in the future, the areas in red show the differences between today and 2 meters of sea level rise. And because we're not dealing with the wave effects here, it's just the base water, ocean water level coming up. It's consistent around the whole coastline. And it's not actually that great, except for in those fairly shallow areas that you probably know. I don't know whether you can see my mouse or not. No, I don't think you can, but yeah, I mean, it's the low spots in your community, which you probably know already, as well as over on the other side of the inlet. There's a particular spot that today is fine, but in future will probably be underwater fairly frequently. All right, so that was our science maps, and you have lots and lots of those to peruse if you feel like it, but you probably don't. So instead of that, we've also produced some maps that are much more useful in terms of determining how you build in Euclid and what you do about this. So we developed what they are called flood construction level maps. These are not mandated, but there's guidance available from the provincial government about how you create these and what scenarios you should be using, and adding some uncertainty and a safety factor, which we call freeboard, to it. And so we've developed those for the district. So basically they give a guidance elevation for how high buildings should be so that when it's really stormy, they don't get damaged. There's quite a lot of variation because of the complexity of the coastline. Next slide, please. And so the which is quite difficult to implement as a planner, because then you're dealing with different houses and different lots with different FCLs. But to try and get away from that problem and try and create some consistency, and to support local qualified professionals to come up with similar numbers, we developed some zone mapping, which basically breaks up the coastline. You put into, I think it's 20 odd zones, where there's some consistency in how the waves interact in there, as well as looking at the built form and the cadastral layer to make sure that our neighborhoods are the same rule is being applied across a street and a neighborhood. And it helps with views and servicing from a district perspective. So again, encourage you, if you feel like it, have a look at all of those maps. And I'm hoping that Bruce will use them in future. So I'm just going to take a quick break there. Does anyone have any questions related to the coastal storm stuff? Because then I'm going to move on to the exciting stuff.
Are there any questions from any of the councilors?
All
Not at
right.
this time. Not at this time.
Okay. I'm overwhelming everybody. That's why.
No, no, it's all good.
My normal tactic. Bowl them over with science. Okay. So that was sort of the summary of the coastal stuff. So we did all of the science, we developed a bunch of maps, and then we took those maps and used guidance that's available to develop some planning support maps that hopefully will be used moving forward. And now we're going to go on to a totally different beast. Next slide, please. Tsunami. So like I said, next slide, please. Like I said, right at the outset, floods have very different characters, and clearly tsunami is quite different than coastal storm, or sort of even like a gentle sea level rise. A tsunami is going to be quite deep. It's going to be very fast moving as it comes onto the coast. Thankfully, quite rare, at least the big ones, although there are tsunamis all the time. Just often they happen at low tide, or the wave isn't actually that big. Very little warning, especially from the Cascadia subduction zone event, and I'll go into a bit of detail about that, but between 20 and 30 minutes between the earthquake and when the wave is going to hit the coastline. Thankfully, they don't last very long, in the order of 2 to 3 hours in terms of the water level. So keeping that in mind, we've got some maps here. So I'm going to try and give you a Tsunami 101, just so that you can understand how these things come in, and maybe try and debunk some myths as well. So basically, a tsunami is a large wave at a long period. It's a very, very long wave that occurs because of displacement on the seabed. And so that displacement can come from a landslide, or it can come from a seismic event where there's a fault line that shifts, and it creates a wave. So if you think about your bathtub, dropping a pebble in your bathtub and you get those ripples, it's effectively the same thing, except it's being forced from the bottom. So you get those ripples which move further and further away. But in the case of tsunami wave, they can actually move at about 700 kilometers an hour because they're so long, they just rip across the ocean. And so they're all fine, and that's all fine and good when they're out in the deep water. They're very, very long, which means they're also quite short. But as they begin to feel the coastline, so as that wave starts to sort of feel the force of the coastline, it starts piling up. And so that's when we have problems, is when that long wave with all of that volume starts piling up into something much steeper and much deeper as it comes onto the coast. So one thing I did want to make clear here, and I think like we're guilty of it, you're guilty of it. We often think of the tsunami wave like that classic Japanese wave with the big pearl that we've all seen with the blue and the pretty picture. It's what's on your tsunami evacuation signs, and you cool it. It's what we just used on our presentation here because we're following the UN conventions for the icons. That's not at all what the tsunami wave is going to look like for you. What it is basically a very dramatic and rapid tide. It's going to come up very, very fast over the course of half an hour or so, and be much, 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 much deeper than anything you've ever seen before. But it's not going to be that dramatic wave that's going to come over and squash you. So I think hopefully that gives you something to calm yourself when you're imagining the tsunami waves tonight in your dreams. They're a little bit gentler than you might imagine. So what really matters when we're trying to do this mapping here is the inundation distance. So that's how far that wave propagates inland, as well as obviously the depth. The velocity is also quite important, especially if it's carrying with it debris. One thing that lots of recent research has shown is that actually it's the velocity on the way out, as all of the boats and the various things that are in the harbor get dragged back across the land. That can be very damaging. So the velocities are quite important as well. All right, so now that we've prepared you, just like, thank you, next slide, on it. Just like for the coastal scenarios, we also looked at a whole whack of different scenarios to figure out what we might see over here in Ucluelet. So we looked at the sea level rise scenarios as well, just to be clear. And then we looked at different types of faults that would create these things. So we know that if you're just looking at the faults, we've got all of the faults along the Cascadia subduction zone, which is off the coast, as well as all of the faults way off in Japan. In this case, because of our compressed timeline and what was available, we were only able to look at Cascadia subduction zone, but we're fairly certain that that is the worst case for you, especially because you've only got 30 minutes of warning and you will have first felt the effects of an earthquake. We looked at 3 different types of faults. You don't really need to know the details, except that your splay fault is the worst case scenario for you in terms of how that comes on shore in Ucluelet. Next slide, please. Next slide. And so basically we take the same process as for the coastal storm, where we do a lot of deep water modeling. So that's over there on the left-hand side of your screen. That's how you're looking at it. So big models, bringing the water on shore into the much more fine detailed models right into Ucluelet. So it's a mix of modeling, but basically we're doing exactly the same thing. We're forcing the model on the outside and driving it in so that we get a good understanding of what this tsunami will look like as it comes into Ucluelet. So I'm going to jump straight to the map so you can see what this looks like. So we've got a total of, I think someone told me 24 maps for tsunami. So they look at those different types of sourcing events. So where along the subduction zone you might have a fault and what type of fault that is. And then we've looked at what this looks like as it comes into Ucluelet in 24 different ways. What I'm showing you here is the worst one, just to sort of couch it in that. I'm going to go to the next slide because I got some more details there too, but I just want to make sure that you knew that this was the worst case. However, it has no safety factors. So this assumes that engineers are perfect, and we are absolutely not. So we're going to be adding some safety factor to this. So, so this is your scenario. So the deep reds there, so we're using a Japanese method to ramp these colors, to try not to scare you, but to try and make sure that it's very understood that that's an area of big concern. So the areas that are red are over 8 meters of water. So that's pretty high. So the average story is about 3 meters. So that's almost a 3-story building. And then the light blues are sort of 0 to 2 meters, which is also extremely damaging. So I picked off a few areas that I think are important for everybody to understand. Over on the far left, where you have that new proposed development, there's a very low spot. The road comes into Ucluelet there, which is going to be vulnerable to a tsunami. It will be inundated and you will be cut off temporarily. So that is something to consider, is the disruption that might occur because of that. So depending on the damage that would be incurred to that road during the tsunami, you may be in a situation where you are cut off from the mainland and from even Tofino, who are going to have their own struggles as well. The inner harbor area itself also experiences a fair amount of flooding, some of it quite deep. And there's also a fair number of residential properties that on the outer coast there that we've sort of marked as being underwater. I'm hoping that none of you are in those homes. I've made that mistake before when doing presentations to council, highlighting someone's home as it's underwater. So that's the scenario, that's the science. It's where it is, and I think it's important to understand these areas so that then you can make some good decisions. So following on from the point that engineers are definitely imperfect, thank you. What we have been doing, so what is very much lacking in the world of tsunamis is any direction from senior government in Canada. So unlike, or from professional associations or from anyone really, unlike the flood construction levels, which has a very standard way of approaching it, we look at this event, this 0.5% event, plus we add 600 millimeters to that. And that's what we do across the entire province. And it's kind of a standard that people accept, and they understand that, you know, it could be exceeded and there's a risk associated with that, but it's tolerable. Whereas for tsunamis, we have no such guidance. So what we have been doing is what we have done in other places as well, is apply a 50% safety factor. I'm getting distracted by my small child. Yes. The 8-year-old wants to join the tsunami presentation. So we've added a 50% safety factor to these. So that's it's very conservative. And so one of the things we've highlighted in our report is the need for you as a community to think about your tolerances to these various things and potentially use different safety factors. This is the safety factor that's been used in Tofino. It's the safety factor, the 50%, we didn't pull from nowhere. It's also applied sort of around the world because there's so much uncertainty in terms of understanding the tsunami, because we don't know where it's going to be sourced from, what that fault's going to look like. There's quite a lot of elements that come into driving this onshore. But what we're showing here are two different, the non-terrifying event and then the terrifying event on the bottom, or the really big event, with the safety factor showing the green areas are areas that we would expect to stay dry during a tsunami. So those are really important in terms of moving forward for emergency response, because those are the areas you can be fairly certain are going to be safe. That's where you want to have your critical infrastructure. That's where you want to store your emergency supplies on those green blobs. Whereas the other areas, other decisions will have to be made going forward. Any questions on tsunamis and tsunami maps?
I don't see any yet.
And all these maps will be available to you very, very shortly, so you can dig into them and see the variations in them.
Perfect.
All right, so next steps, I'm almost done. So next steps, as Bruce alluded to at the beginning, as in our field, like we're quite strong advocates for the idea that you need to share this information, and putting lines on a map doesn't change the fact that something bad's going to happen. It just really enables you to make really good decisions. So this is something I think that is quite challenging. I know many other councils and regional districts across Vancouver Island are struggling, especially with the sea level rise maps, because they're concerned about property values and other things. But at the end of the day, that's not, it doesn't make sense in terms of doing the right thing. And in your case, actually, sea level rise is actually not a big factor in determining flood levels, because you're nice and steep, which then creates a nice ability to create those really big waves. So we're very keen proponents of sharing information with the public so that they can make smart decisions themselves, as well as sharing with your neighboring communities, especially on the east coast of the inlet. And then secondly, I think it's quite important to do your best at this point to use this information to support your short-term decisions, your long-term decisions, to try and mitigate your future risk. So for example, you now have all of these new FCL maps that can be used to update building bylaws to make sure that any new houses, any new builds, or any major new redevelopment is built at a safe elevation moving forward. You can also use all of these nuanced maps that show all of these different scenarios for different futures and different likelihoods of events to develop some sort of long-term strategies for sort of siting things in your community. So, for example, putting critical infrastructure well out of harm's way, but also thinking of the best use of the areas that are unlikely to get flooded frequently, parks, recreational things, all of those kind of things. And then the tsunami maps in particular are useful for emergency planning. One thing to keep in mind is that from all of the research we've done, and we do a lot of work with the group. We should Google them because they're really cool. They got a laboratory in the UK, so the University College London Epic Center. They have a laboratory where they create tsunami waves and batch various things to see how they survive. And all of their learning and also doing lots of field work around the world shows that it's very difficult to build a structure that will withstand an earthquake and then a tsunami, unless it's very specifically designed for that purpose. And there are buildings out there. So Tofino, for example, is looking at building an evacuation structure at the moment, which would be designed to manage that and all of the erosion and stuff as the wave comes in and out. But for the most part, it doesn't make economical sense or practical sense to be building structures in Ucluelet to withstand an earthquake and a tsunami at the same time. So it's the unfortunate state of affairs, but it also creates sort of a constraint on what you can do about it, which really helps, I think, with decisions. And then finally, going back to my last slide here, you don't need to read all of the fine print. You can put that there so you can have it for when you want to peruse this later on tonight, the slide deck. But going back to that triangle at the beginning, if we remember the risk triangle and the concept of trying to reduce that risk by reducing the consequence, we can't do much about the likelihood of these events. They're going to happen. And so we do understand the frequency of them. We can think about reducing that risk to something that is acceptable to you as a community. And that might be different. It will be different for different people. It'll be different for different things. So for example, risk to life generally is considered the most important thing. And so that risk line will move probably further down because there isn't much acceptable risk for risk to life, or even critical infrastructure, but there is acceptable risk in terms of some pieces of recreational infrastructure, for example. So moving forward, I think the next step for Ucluelet is to start looking at risk, so starting to look at how that floodwater interacts with your community in terms of what's there, the people that are there, the businesses that are there, and then moving forward using that information to support really good decisions to reduce your risk and become more resilient to coastal floods and ready to respond to the tsunami event. I believe that's it. Yes, it is. Thank you. You all made it.
Thank you. Any questions from any of the counselors? I just have a couple comments. Obviously, this this is not a document that needs to be updated every 5 years. Once we have the document, it's pretty much it's good for the next foreseeable future, obviously.
Well, this is the answer you're not going to like. So absolutely, yes. I mean, so the science was done to the best available information today, but I think it should be reviewed, I would say, every 5 or so years, just to make sure that the science is up to date, specifically related to the sea level rise piece. So like I said, we were using the guidance from the province, which actually dates back to 2011. They haven't updated it since, and it's actually based on IPCC reports from 2008, I think, at this point. So it's quite old science. So I think you need to acknowledge that you might need to update this. However, all the models are there, all the maps, it's not actually as much work as it might sound. And then the second thing, I think, in terms of reviewing it, is just keeping your eye on new work that's being done, looking at the Cascadia subduction zones. So there's quite a lot of research that's ongoing currently by the province and by Natural Resources Canada to better understand that fault. And so once we have a better understanding of that, then I think it's important to just review and make sure that the scenarios that we adopted still make sense in the context of the new information. But yeah, I think this has set you up really well for the medium term, but it is important to make sure that you're catching new information as it comes in, especially if you're making some really big decisions related to this information.
No, I appreciate it. I know that there's been a lot of work in here, so I don't want to underestimate what you've done, and not that we don't appreciate this document. And I think we're just fortunate again that this is a UBCM grant, fully funded, and excuse me. And it's something that's been long overdue for the entire for this peninsula, and thank you for taking it on with as much passion that you have, because I know talking to Bruce this morning, he was probably lit up as much as you were talking about it, so which is good. So thanks again. Is there any questions from any councillors? And thanks for putting your energy into this, and you better get your 8-year-old out of the cookies there.
Yes, apologies. It's impossible, but you all understand. All right, thank you very much.
Thanks again for putting the effort into this. Appreciate it.
No worries.
Well, there are 3 recommendations. If someone would like to take them on, Councillor Hoare.
I'll do it. I do want to comment that Tamsin's reference to our gnarly shoreline is something that I feel should be put on a t-shirt or something, because I think we could adopt that phrase somehow. So I move that council receives the District of Ucluelet Coastal Flood Mapping Report for information. Are we going to do these together or separate?
I don't think anybody's going to oppose anything, so I'll let you just flow through the 3.
Okay. Number 2, that council directs staff to make the full contents of the report available for public access to inform interested community members and regional partners by A, creating a webpage on the District of Ucluelet website with links to all final project materials, B, sharing the project results with the Ucluelet government, Toquet government or nation, Alberni Clayoquot Regional District, Parks Canada, and the District of Tofino for their information. C, mounting an informational display in the Ucluelet Community Center so that community members can access full-size copies of the final maps, final report, and information posters explaining the project results and next steps. And 3, that council earmark the results of the flood mapping project for upcoming discussions in the strategic planning update and subsequent budget preparations for next steps to A, update emergency preparedness plans, B, consider resiliency and long-term asset management planning, C, consider changes to development regulations, including a process for public consultation as they relate to existing properties, and D, consider new policy on future developments to avoid areas of flood risk.
Thank you, Councillor Hoare. Second by Councillor McEwen. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, here's an exciting one. 13.2 off-leash dog park. Welcome, Miss Fortune.
Test. There we go. All right. Good afternoon. So at the last council meeting, council directed staff to look at off-leash dog areas. So we looked at 3 areas. We looked at Frank Jones Memorial Park, Tugwell Park, and Seaplane Base Park. From these areas, we looked at existing fencing, existing usage, and some general comments around the space. From this, we do strongly feel that the Frank Jones Memorial Park would probably be our best bet to create an off-leash park area, looking at it on a trial basis to see how that might play out. I think it also addresses some of the local issues in the community to have that space available for dogs and having an off-leash area. The reason why we just didn't think Tugwell was a good idea. Tugwell is a large area, which we actually have a lot of active programming going on there, as well as it does not have a full fenced-in area. Seaplane Base Park, although it does have a full fenced-in area, is also an area where we do operate programming, as well as with the lights, we operate evening programming when we're able to do such in a future moment. Frank Jones Park is totally ready to go and does not need much except for signage. And right now we normally have Little League is the only thing that is technically able to go on that space. And we only run Little League for 6 to 8 weeks. Last year we did a trial run and use Tugwell Fields for the Little League program, and it would work just fine. So this is why we do recommend Frank Jones Memorial Park for off-leash dog park area.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Fortune. Any questions from any councillors regarding this? Councillor Kemps?
I just want to have a conversation about Frank Jones Memorial. I'm having a hard time with the Frank Jones one just because it was community built way back in the day. And I just don't know how, I don't know if it would be interesting to find out, like I'm fine for trial for Frank Jones, but I'm just like in the long term, it would be interesting to see a quote on lighting, because that's why the seaplane base one is used. And also, even if we're able to move that lighting that is down there. I don't know if there's a discussion around that, but it's just the community built it, and I think it's really important.
Through the mayor, yes, thank you for that. It is something we have we have definitely discussed. The lighting that is at the seaplane base right now would not be something that would be easily moved and would cost more than it to actually purchase new. So we have built a bit of into the budget with looking at lighting for that larger area, which would be the Tugwell Park, but I wouldn't recommend that in terms of the dogs, obviously, for that end of it. We are looking at the whole area and program planning for the entire area, and with which the Frank Jones Memorial Park would be part of it. I do understand that it is a community-based park that was originally put into play, but at this moment, it's not really being used for its original purpose. And I think this creates a good trial basis to see if this is something that might work.
Thank you. Councillor Cole?
Sorry, I'll just chime in that, now that he's phoning me, coincidence. David coached the Little League stuff, and I will concur that it does work fine at the Tugwell, if that was any part of anybody's concern, but I understand what you're saying there. Just, yeah.
No, that's some good feedback. I appreciate that. I know I'm supportive of the recommendation, knowing that it's a trial basis. I think this is the one that's turnkey. Trial basis to me, we got 6 months till Christmas time here, and we'll get a good understanding, and we'll know what, I'm optimistic. I think we all are with the planning for Tugwell Fields or what that's going to look like with our hard sports and outside lighting. I think that's what Ms. Fortune is referring to when we're talking about that. So, I would assume that we're probably going to have a little bit more information in the next 6 months regarding that, how that could look. So I'm supportive of the recommendation. I had something else there. I just would like to I don't think I need to make a motion, but I do really, when you talk about signage, and I did talk to you in the hallway about it, you are going to put some signage out there, but it would be, I think, appropriate to just have a bit of history of that area up there. It is called Frank Jones for a reason, and just just the history from M&B to, I know, Miss Garbertson's going to have all the background for you, just to be able to have that little history plaque outside of, because it's, it's information for everybody, and you already have it on there. So thank you. Are there any other comments from any councillors? Councillor McEwen, did you have something?
I was just going to make the recommendation, the motion, if
Perfect.
that's okay.
Yeah.
I'll move recommendation 1 that council designate Frank Jones Memorial Park as an off-leash dog area on a trial basis.
Second by Councillor Hoare. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Fortune. I think we look forward to seeing how that works for the next 6 months.
I had one comment.
Oh.
You missed me.
Oh, sorry. Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to make sure when we're doing the signage for Frank Jones and the temporary, there really needs to be the signage down at the seaplane base as well, because that gets used all the time, and we need to direct the traffic up the hill, as it were.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that will piggyback on there, and back to what I said at the beginning. This will be something, again, we can put on the toolkit with Tourism Euclid as well. So not just the locals, but also the traveling motorists here as we talk about leash dogs and unleashed dogs. So yes, I'm getting head nods from Ms. Fortune. So that's acknowledged and will be looked after under the signage. Okay. 13.3 council proceedings under ministerial order M192. Is that you, Mr. Rosenberg?
Yep, that's me. So M192 is a little bit of a U-turn from the provincial government. It came out on Wednesday last week. At its most basic level, it tells us that council needs to pass a very specific motion in the event that they decide to keep council chambers closed. Our recommendation here today is to open council chambers, which will allow 8 people to attend council, or 10 people to attend council chambers at a time. There are challenges associated with that, because the moment that we cannot accommodate a single member of the public, for example, if the 11th person comes to attend, we need to create an overflow area. Today we've created that overflow area, and the overflow area is a place where members of the public can go and watch and hear council meetings like this. Today our overflow area is in activity room number 1. And at this point we have not reached our occupancy limit, so there's no need for council to pass this resolution that effectively says that the space is closed. There are a couple other minor changes that have come into effect as a result of M192. The first is a very important one. It states that we cannot do third reading and adoption at the same meeting unless we're adopting very specific finance-related bylaws, none of which are at play today. So generally, we're going to go back to the basic rule that there has to be 24 hours between third reading and adoption. It also creates an interesting requirement and a difficult requirement for us when we're conducting electronic meetings like this today, which effectively says that there has to be a place for members of the public to go and view these meetings. Or more specifically, it says that there must be a place for them to hear these meetings. So our place is YouTube, it's here in this council chambers, and it's in our overflow room. The final piece of the puzzle has to do with public hearings. There were no changes to the order regarding public hearings, which means that you can do public hearings by electronic means, or by exclusively by electronic meetings, or by in person, or a mix of the two. But since we're opening council chambers to the public, it makes a lot of sense at this point to also do public hearings that are both in person and electronic. It creates some challenges for my department, which we need to address over time and figure out, and I think we're actually figuring out. The final piece of this puzzle, I guess there are a lot of pieces to this particular puzzle, is we're going to come back to council with a report about moving council meetings to the main hall. There's some logistics and IT work associated with that, and we're hoping that the meeting in August will be conducted in the main hall, which may require us to move some council dates around for the regular meeting in August. And I'll follow up with you all by way of email to confirm that those dates work, or to see which date works best for the most people. And then we'll have to get a motion of council to change the schedule. So there are basically 4 recommendations in this particular report, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Councillor Cole?
I just have one piece of information in that the ACRD at our last meeting opted, because the night before we had decided to just go the virtual way, and they opted to do the dual. And so that was voted in last week, and their staff had lots of reasons why they thought that was the better idea. So I don't know if they might have come up with a solution or two, or it could be of any help with if there are any obstacles that we're coming up against in doing that integrated program.
A question for you, Councillor Cole. Has the ACRD gone to online like this yet with their meetings?
Oh yeah, so all of they're not, so the ACRD meetings have all been Zoom the whole time.
No, I'm more referring to the YouTube format for the general public can witness it.
So live streaming, it's being recorded, and it's not the same as ours. It's not happening the same as ours. It's not as user friendly. Let me come up with my right words and I'll get back to you. We are Zoomed and people can ask questions.
Okay.
So I guess they can stream it. It's not on YouTube though.
Okay.
So I don't know where it's stored, to be honest. Sorry.
No, it's all good. Thank you. Councillor McEwen?
Thank you. Through the mayor to staff, I see that the council chambers will accommodate 10 people. How many can be accommodated in the 2 activity rooms?
Today, the overflow room is set up to accommodate over 12 people.
And that's just in activity room 1?
That's activity room 1 and 2.
Oh, both of them. Okay, thank you.
And I guess the reality too, Mr. Rotenberg, is the fact is if we do have public coming in, it wouldn't be for some of the staff that are in the room here today could simply go to the overview so you could have the general public here. So I think there's a little give and take with that. And it's, I know that you like process and it's probably driving you crazy that you're having to change your plans all the time. But, and you know, and I did go see what you did in activity 1 and 2 and it does look like it's set up nicely. So I appreciate that. Yep.
Just a quick comment through the mayor. Just thanks to Joseph and the Corporate Services Department because this decision came down. It was actually deemed the original instructions that were provided to us were deemed to be not legal, and so that switch caused this kind of mayhem across communities across BC. But I think working towards August, I think council's expressed a desire to also be in the same room together and get to see each other's faces. That's what moving to the main hall would mean for us. So if we can accommodate that and see if we can make it work for future meetings, it's just, I feel like, and we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Things can always change, but I think the way that the changes we've made, we can adjust for this meeting, the next meeting, and then things can be moving forward more smoothly in the following meeting. We're just going to have to adapt just for the current system, but it's a very last minute change that came in, and there was no flexibility for us to adjust otherwise. So thank you to the department for help making it happen.
I know it's going to change again before that August deadline. You know, I can only imagine when you have gymnastics mat set up and you're trying to get a council meeting, I'll be, you know, some logistics, but you know, things are changing by the week here. So we'll just monitor it and thank you. Any other comments for Councillor Cole?
Sorry, just double check. You can access all of the meetings through the ACRD website. That's where they're kept.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
the Zoom is live and people can in and the information when you go to the ACRD, for example, for next week, you can click on it. It tells you how to send in questions, etc.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. That's good feedback. Thank you. Okay. There's 4 recommendations. Who would like to take them on? Go ahead, Councillor Hoare.
Why not? I like to hear myself speak. I move that council open chambers to the public. B, designate activity rooms 1 or 2 in the Ucluelet Community Center as a location where members of the public may listen and watch a live stream of council meetings when chambers is at capacity. C, instruct staff to facilitate in-person and Zoom webinar participation in public hearings, and D, instruct staff to prepare a report about conducting a council meeting in the main hall at the Ucluelet Community Center.
Thank you for doing that. Seconder, Councillor McEwen. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Where are we at here? 13.4, development permit for 1911 and 1905 Peninsula Road. Is this you, Mr. Gregg?
Yes, it is. We have a few slides that will come up here momentarily because we have a few development applications. We have a couple slides for each of them just so that council can follow along. So this first one is a development permit for really for adding a 6-unit motel, renovating an existing building, and adding some new landscaping on what's part of the West Coast Motel property. The parcels are at 1911 and 1905 Peninsula Road. And when the first slide comes up, it'll sort of show the context of it. I would note there's 2 addresses because it is currently 2 different properties, but they are going to be amalgamating those There we are. So the yellow line between the existing building on the right and what you can see are some trailers that are in the air photo from a few years ago now, parked out front. That yellow line shows where the existing property line is, and that they're working on erasing that, so it would become one larger property. So that deals with some setbacks and little issues. Maybe the next slide, please. So the proposal is to remove an old garage, which is attached to that existing sort of house building on the right side, and add the new 6-unit motel, which is the darker square on the left side there. And the space in between becomes a little bit of a courtyard. Maybe next slide, please. Which there in the view, particularly in the lower image, as you can see from the architect, there'd be that space where the garage now is would open up, and there'd be some views into the harbor and a bit of the sort of circulation around the new motel building. The materials, the color, and the landscaping, they're all positive contributions. And I would just note, this is a good slide, how the architect has really given some thought to sort of picking up some echoes and working with what's around it and the surroundings. You can see the moorage building off to the left there. Particularly in the materials and the colors, they're trying to make this a positive addition, I think. I think maybe the next slide as well, please. There's another view of it. So this is a development permit for form and character on this section of Peninsula Road. And if there are any questions, I'm certainly here to answer them.
Any questions from any councillors? Hearing, seeing none, I think it was a good report. I just, on page, sorry, Marilyn, Councillor McEwen.
Thank you. Just out of curiosity, what is the process for them to combine the two properties through the mayor to staff?
Through the mayor. Erasing property lines to sort of amalgamate them, it really depends on the history of how the lots were created in the first place. Sometimes that can be a very simple thing where it's really a matter of dealing with land titles directly. In this case, I believe it was two separate subdivisions that resulted in those lots. So it technically is a subdivision, though a fairly straightforward one, because you're not adding new lots or reducing a lot area. Really, it's a consolidation is a fairly straightforward one. But ultimately, a new survey plan is registered with the Land Title Office, and it gives rise to a new title for which is, it sort of erases those two existing titles.
Any other questions? No, I was just going to talk about the sidewalk. I think it's great that it's addressed here, and thank you to staff to do that. And I look forward to seeing this go to the public hearing stage. So
just point out, this is a development permit, so there's no public hearing involved with this application. This would be approval of the development permit. It's zoned for the use. Okay. Really, it's council at this point is in a position to authorize issuing the DP.
Thanks for that clarity. I appreciate it. Oh, we have the applicant here as well, if you wanted to speak to your application.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I think you guys covered most of what we wanted to put forward in the narrative and the drawings that we included. And, like you said, we were trying to pick up on a lot of the natural materials and existing materials of the motels beside us. So we're happy that you think that it's going to be a positive addition, and here to answer any other questions you guys may have about it. I'm the architect on the project.
What was your first name?
Oh, sorry, Jeremiah.
Jeremiah. Thanks, Jeremiah.
Yeah, no problem.
Any questions for Jeremiah? Councillor Hoare?
I did ask this question of Bruce yesterday, but there's a comment in your development permit just that there would be a community consultation. So I don't remember seeing any notice about it, but that happened apparently?
No, so what we did is I've been working closely with the Cassandra. She manages the motel, And we sent out to people in close proximity to the motel, we sent out a letter, and we held it on a Sunday. No one showed up. So we thought that was a good sign. And I can provide you record of the letter and everybody we sent it to. And I think I've sent that to John Toogood to show him that we did actually send out these letters, but nobody ended up coming to the consultation.
No, that's fine. I just was curious about the
Yeah.
process.
Well, thanks again for. Doesn't look like there's too many questions. It was a great staff report, and we have one recommendation here. Anybody like to take that on? Councillor Kemps.
I'll move recommendation 1 that council approved development permit DP 20-01 for a 6-unit motel, general building renovation to an existing motel building, and new landscaping on the properties located at 1911 and 1905 Peninsula Road.
Second by Councillor McEwen. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, and thanks Jeremiah for attending, and we look forward to supporting your build here in the near future.
Thank you so much. Take care, you guys.
I was looking just for a second. I'd like to take a 5-minute break if possible, and then we'll get back at it. Case by Councillor Hoare. All in favor? Thank you very much. Okay, welcome back, councilors. Yeah, I'll wait for Councilor Hoare here. Just wait a second. Okay, you're all teed up, Councilor Hoare?
The watched pot wouldn't boil.
Okay, I thought you had something going. Okay, we're gonna get back going here. So thank you for that. We'll start with 14.1, proposed rezoning subdivision and development permits for 221 Minato. Mr. Gregg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd add to that, it's also a development variance permit and a temporary use permit as well. This is the full package. Council has seen this application before, and so this is coming back because at the last step where there were, it sort of got the bylaw ball rolling, if you will, but the direction was to come back and we needed to come with a little more detail in terms of the applicants provides more detailed plans, which are in the agenda, as well as we've drafted the permits, covenant that would go on the property. Those are attached and are in the numerous appendices to this report. Before I forget, I would note that we do have a typo that we found. Thank you, Councillor Hoare. In the bylaw, it's to clarify that the idea is to have the number of showers and the number of washrooms within the bylaw. There is a typo where there's a difference between the letters where it should say 1/2 and then be in brackets 0.5. We need to add the word half in there to clarify. If we could have the slides, please. Yeah, I'll just briefly overview. Here we are. So this is the appendix to the zoning amendment bylaw. So council will recall it's to do a couple of things. One is to create a guest house zoned parcel, which is at the top of the page there, which is where currently they're proposing just to build a home, and then to create a second area that is zoned for campground use, which is on either side of the stream. And so it'll be the lower parcel. And then a third piece, which would be a separate parcel, but that is proposed to be dedicated as park. So that's the shoreline and the stream corridor. Next slide, please. And so today it's the zoning bylaw is one of the the first pieces that council is addressing. So we're suggesting essentially repealing the second reading so that we can amend the bylaw to clarify some of the terms for the campground use, and that would be generally applying to all campgrounds. But while we're at it, we'll catch that typo. And then also to issue development permits, one to allow for the subdivision of the property into those parcels, and then the third, the development permit, which is being requested, is really the first phase of what they're proposing to develop, which is the long-term camping, which is the light blue in this slide. Next slide, please. Just to zoom in on the light blue. So they're proposing, council will recall, there's 10 camping spaces. This is intended or proposed to be seasonal, long-term, so up to 6 months, maybe local seasonal employees who would be camping here. And so this, the zoning would allow the campground use. What's being requested is a temporary use permit to allow the long-term use of that, because camping typically is a short-term tourist accommodation parcel. So this is a bit of a pilot to use this as a longer-term and seasonal sort of staffing accommodation. Next slide, please. And here's just a graphic illustrating in more detail than had been previously shown where planting and screening is going to happen. And this is a good slide to explain as well. One of the components is a development variance permit that council is being asked to issue, which was for, and initially council had seen plans for a house they're planning to build. They're requesting a height variance for that. But this is also, as you'll see, one of the campsites would, and it's the camping space would encroach within a 7.5 meter setback from the property line of that campground parcel. They're proposing to reduce that to 1.5 meters. And really what their intent is here, their designer has looked at siting those camping spaces among the existing trees in that area rather than doing clearing. And so to get 10 spaces in there, they're requesting to vary that setback for one of the spaces. And it's the one that's sort of in the center left, if you will. Perhaps there, I'll just pause and see if there are any questions.
Councilor Howard, do you have one?
Oh, I have many. Unfortunately, I didn't collate them. But I have a couple of things, and where do I want to start? Okay. Where am I starting? I'll start at the beginning. When we granted the original development permit, 19-01, there is a requirement that restoration is monitored by a qualified environmental professional, and a written confirmation of completion according to the vegetation management plan must be provided for acceptance by the District of Ucluelet. We haven't seen that yet. I appreciate that Mr. Grigg had a verbal from the QEP that he sent around in an email today that, this is ongoing stuff. And I appreciate that this does need to, this is a development that I don't have a problem with it moving forward, but I want to see that remediation complete. There was a lot of environmental damage to that site. And that mitigation needs to have happened before we get to the final stage. That being said, when I look at the development variance permit and having that one camping site within 1.5 meters of the edge of the newly restored 10-meter riparian buffer, I'm not super happy about that, but I understand courtesy of the placement of the currently existing trees, and we do want to save as many of those currently existing trees as we can. I understand why the placement for it. That being said, I think we should have something in there, I'm not sure at what stage, about along the backside of that camping site, along that buffer zone, some sort of, maybe it's hedging with natural plants, I don't know, salal, whatever you use. There's lots of things that'll build a hedge that grow in our neck of the woods, evergreen, huckleberry, all of those things, but something to sort of screen it, because if I were walking along the trail that's eventually going to end up on that buffer zone, I don't really want to be like looking smack dab at the back of somebody's motorhome. So there's that. But as long as that is something that can happen, that in the landscaping neck of the woods, in the planning, I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with this moving forward to a public hearing, but I'm just not going to feel comfortable with final voting on things without having seen that report from the QEP signed off with all the plannings done, and the rather extensive remediation that was needed on this site complete. I feel pretty strongly about this one. Just saying.
Mr. Gregg, you had a comment?
I didn't want to preclude any other questions, but it's a good question that Councilor has raised, and it caused me to go back and revisit some of the information here, and that Council in April of 2019 now actually passed a motion on the timing of that question. So one of the council motions previously was that setting out and saying that adoption of the zoning amendment bylaw would be subject to, and one of the things is completion of the site restoration work, including the report by the QEP. So, so council, if it helps the discussion of it, that's sort of currently the direction council's provided would be that prior to finally adopting their zoning bylaw after a public hearing, there should be an expectation from the owner that the QEP report would be prepared by then.
That would be great.
Councillor Hoare, do you have any other comments?
I don't think so, but
Okay.
I haven't had a lot of collation time. So,
That's fine.
if somebody else has comments, great, and I may come back.
Okay. Councillor Cole?
I think that we kind of have our bases covered with what we did in 2019, and that's still there. And I think that should bring Jennifer, that will be, I mean, I feel more comfortable knowing that that is still the way it is, and moving forward, I would be happy to do it knowing that we would still have that in the end before we made any final.
I'm getting a couple other head nods there. Do you have any other comments from Kemps or McEwen? No. Greg, did you have, or Mr. Greg, did you have a few more things you wanted to say?
I could certainly respond if there's any more questions. Just in the staff report, it's noted that we're supportive of this moving forward to a public hearing. That would seem to be the appropriate next step to get input from the public. And I just note, there is some pretty significant park and trail contributions being offered as part of this. So and the detail that's been provided by the applicant, I think, really helps to have a clear picture of what this would be moving forward. So unless there's questions.
No, I don't think there is. I think we've, a year ago we talked about it, and I'm very supportive of seeing this go to the public hearing. And if I don't see any other questions or comments, perhaps I'll just ask one of you to move a couple of the recommendations. Councillor McEwen?
Would you like them done one at a time?
If you don't mind, just in case any surprises pop up.
Okay. I'll move recommendation 1 that District of Ucluelet zoning bylaw amendment bylaw number 1244 2019 be advanced to a public hearing.
Second by Councillor Cole. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And I'll move recommendation 2 that council rescind second reading of District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1256 2019.
Second by Councillor Kemps. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And I'll move recommendation 3 that District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1256 2019 be given second reading as amended and be advanced to a public hearing.
Sorry, Councillor, I'm just going to change that one. There's, did you get the document from Mr. Rosenberg this afternoon? There was just a couple changes to a couple motions there.
From Mr. Rotenberg?
Yeah,
Yes.
Rotenberg.
Did
That's
you
the
want-
one that we should be going off for the motions.
Okay.
There was not a seconder to that one, so we'll just ask you to do number 3 if you have that before you.
That was the top one of the 2? Yes.
The number 3 that says that section
I agree.
7C.
that Section 7C of District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1256, 2019 be amended to read: washroom facilities for fully serviced camping spaces, in brackets, camping spaces equipped with a sewer and water connection, are to be equipped with a minimum of 1 toilet and 1/2 shower stall per 8 camping spaces.
Thank you. A seconder, Councillor Hoare. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
And number 4 is the same as what's written in our report, I believe. So I'll move recommendation 4, that council direct staff to give notice to receive comment on development variance permit DVP 19-02 and temporary use permit TUP 19-01 in conjunction with the public hearing on the zoning amendment bylaws and proposed development at 221 Minato Road.
There's no harm in doing that one before the other, is there? Yeah, we'll just do this one, and then there's the one verse before that we haven't missed. We did miss, so it's not going to be. There's not a problem. They're not in order, so I'm just going to ask for a seconder on that one. Second by Councillor Kemps. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All in favor? Thank you. And it's the number 3 that we just need to, the last one that needs to be read out, if you don't mind, Councillor McEwen.
I read the number 3 out.
It's number 4.
Sorry, it's number 4 on the document that was sent by Joseph.
Okay.
That
I will move that District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1256, 2019 be given second reading as amended and be advanced to a public hearing.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Cole. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Um, 14.2 zoning bylaw amendment for 799 Marine Drive. Mr. Gregg.
Through the mayor, and thank you for advancing the slide. This is an application, essentially a zoning amendment to allow for a detached cottage instead of an accessory, or instead of I'll start again. To allow for a detached cottage, what we're calling an accessory residential dwelling unit, instead of an attached secondary suite on the property at 799 Marine Drive. Attached to the staff report is a draft bylaw number 1263. It would be a site-specific zoning amendment to allow an accessory residential dwelling unit. Really, essentially, instead of a secondary suite or any kind of short-term rentals in the form of a bed and breakfast. Essentially, the proposed cottage or ARDU in this staff report notes it's well located. It's a large parcel. It would appear to have low likelihood of impact, but the next sort of step of holding a public hearing, or if council supports giving readings to the bylaw, going to a public hearing would certainly seek that input to see if any of the neighbors have concerns. And so staff support moving this forward to a public hearing to seek that public comment, and note that the form, as there's been a couple other examples where this sort of request has come forward to essentially build a cottage instead of secondary suite, and as noted in the report, that adds some diversity and maybe a housing type as a long-term rental that has some value in our community. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Gregg? Okay. Well, we'll just push this off to a public hearing if I don't see any questions. We do have one recommendation.
I'm going to move it.
Yeah, please.
We'll move recommendation 1 that the District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1263, 2020 be given first and second reading and advanced to a public hearing.
Second by Councillor Cole. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 14.3 zoning amendment and development permit for 2015 Bay Street. Mr. Gregg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a rezoning and development permit being requested to allow for a 2-unit motel on the water area over an old wharf, also parking on the upland area, and as well as what's being requested is the ability to have mobile vending on the wharf at 2015 Bay Street. This, as the report notes, is a sort of former industrial use here of a fish plant, and what's being proposed is an interesting mix of uses to sort of repurpose the site and the structure. And I think there's some, it's a creative reuse, and there's strong support for taking that approach within our guidelines, within our OCP, because it really is recognizing the heritage and interest of those uses on our shoreline and putting it to new use. And the new owners of the property have made some investments to solidify the structure of the wharf, and what they're hoping to do is basically have 2 rental units, use it for a base for fishing, and as part of their proposal to do some landscaping around a parking area that they would create. The sort of image in the lower left, that sketch sort of indicates how a parking spaces could lay out. And you can see the sort of red line that goes through. Part of this proposal, the owners are supportive of providing a statutory right-of-way to the district to allow public access through as sort of one more link in the future harbor walk along the shoreline. So there's definitely some, I'd say, interesting components to this, and staff are recommending that council give first and second reading to the bylaw that's been drafted and advance it to a public hearing as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Are there any questions for Mr. Gregg? Okay, Councillor Hoare.
Not a question, more a comment. I think this is a great use of an old dock site.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke to Mr. Gregg, and because I was concerned about the structural integrity of that dock. But I gather that the new owners are people who would know, as it were, about dock structural integrity. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Councillor Cole, did you have a question?
No, I just had a comment. I think it's super easy to make decisions on what's right for the community when things conform to the OCP. And I'm looking forward to the OCP.
Okay. She goes every second month. She just does that. I thought you were going to get away with that too. Anyway, but at least you're consistent. It's good.
No,
I don't see any other hands. So Councillor Hoare, I'll leave you to read this motion.
Move that the District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1271/2020 be given first and second reading and advance to a public hearing.
Thank you. Second by Councillor Cole. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Yeah, and I just back to the planning staff and the applicant as well, just engaging in that right away, and with future hopes of one day we have this whole inner harbor with some more sidewalks or trails is great. So thank you. Zoning bylaw amendment for 796 Marine Drive. Mr. Gregg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a zoning amendment to allow for 2 detached guest cottages instead of 2 attached vacation rental suites in the property at 796 Marine Drive, and also the addition of a secondary suite within the mix of uses. The image that's on the screen, which is in the report as well, sort of gives some context for the site of the subject property. So it's on Marine Drive, sort of backing onto the park strip where the Wild Pacific Trail parallels Odyssey Lane through there. So it's quite a deep property, well forested, and I'd say, and I think it comes from the staff report, that staff consider this a thoughtful proposal. That really what they're looking at is adding long-term housing in the form of a secondary suite. Also, the 2 what are rather modest guest cottages, next slide please, are being sited within the forest. One of them is to be accessible, which is always, I think, an excellent consideration. And and the other component there, the secondary suite is the rental, but also the main house is quite modest. So the total between those four components is, I think it's 2,250 square feet, which is less than a quarter of the total of what the zoning under the current VR zoning might allow on that. Yes, the suite is an additional use, but really the vacation rental of the 2 units is already allowed in the VR1. This is just putting it in a different format in quite a modest footprint. So we have no problem recommending advancing this to a public hearing to seek public input. And I would note, I believe we have the owner online who wishes to speak to it as well and can maybe cover anything that I may have missed, unless there are any questions from council.
Welcome.
Hi, I can't see if my camera's on or not. So
we can see you.
But okay, well, you can see and hear me, so that's great. Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I think this summary was pretty good. Basically, we just felt like we want, we love the property because it's got so many lovely trees, and we want to keep as many of those as possible. So by having multiple buildings with smaller footprints, that makes that easier to do. I just thought it'd be nice to be on the line in case there are any questions that I could help with.
Thank you. Are there any questions from any of the councillors? I don't see Councillor McEwen on there. She has do you have a question at all? Councillor Kempsey, do you have a question? No, nothing.
Can I make a comment?
Sure. Yep.
I just thought it was a very thoughtful use of the property to maintain the trees and keep it a nice green space. I thought it was a really, really neat. So cool. Thank you.
It's always like that. The applicant prepares to answer a bunch of questions, and then it's usually no questions. So it's perfect. So, but thank you for being available for us for any kind of questions. I think it looks like that we have no pressing questions, and we'll push this off to public hearing if one of the councillors would like to move that. Yeah, perfect.
I can do that.
Councillor McEwen, you do have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I will move recommendation 1 that District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1267/2020 be given first and second reading and advanced to a public hearing.
Second by Councillor Hoare. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. You had a busy couple of weeks, Mr. Greg, there, cleaning that up. That's good. 14.5 Council Procedure Bylaw, third reading. Mr. Rotenberg, did you want to speak to it?
Yeah, briefly, at its most basic level, I made a drafting error in one of the last sections.
And the drafting error was basically that I was referring to a section that no longer exists because I was building off of a base bylaw and I made a mistake. So what I'm asking for council to do today is to rescind second reading, read it as amended for a second time, then read it for a third time. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Are there any questions? No, we're going to help you out with this. So one of the councillors, if you'd like to do that.
I got
Councillor
this.
Hoare, thank you.
Moving that council rescind second reading of District of Ucluelet Council Procedures Bylaw number 1264/2020. Do we need to do them separately? Probably.
Yes, you do,
You do?
because
Okay.
they're
Yeah.
you're adopting a bylaw.
That's what I thought.
Okay, it was seconder, Councillor McEwen. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Moving recommendation 2 that council give District of Ucluelet Council Procedures Bylaw number 1264/2020 second reading as amended.
Second by Councillor Cole. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And And moving recommendation 3, that council give District of Ucluelet Council Procedures Bylaw number 1264, 2020, third reading.
Second by Councillor McEwen. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, you owe us one for that. Okay. Mr. Courts, this is the one you're waiting for. You've been here for 2 hours patiently. Thank you. Reserve berthage at Ucluelet Harbor. Ms. Fortune.
Good. There we go. Okay, through the mayor. After a lot of discussion and looking at a number of different options, you have the recommendations before you. I would also like to start. Councillor McEwen asked a question about loss of the difference in revenue from 2019 to 2020. Just so everyone's aware, we are currently down 58,000 from the period 1 to 6, from 2019 to 2020. And that's directly, that is expenses. Nope, sorry, revenue. And that, of course, there are also corresponding expenses related to Kevin's cost would be down as well. And if you don't quite understand that, Donna's in the audience. Okay. So the recommendation is that council direct staff to equalize an overall deficit incurred by the small craft harbor resulting from COVID-19 by drawing funds from the harbor reserve funds. So this is one of our key recommendations if available. One of the things we would like to look at is updating the entire harbor regulation bylaw. We've been operating out of 3 different bylaws at the main bylaw with 2 amendments. And so we're trying to clean that up. So that is the reason why we are recommending a new bylaw for the harbor regulation bylaw. And then the other big recommendation is that council direct staff to offset shortfalls for the harbor manager's revenue associated with a 3-month reserve fee as opposed to a 6-month. So this is something that council had asked at the last council. And we did look at the variety of income, and on a quote-unquote normal year, we've been looking at $21,600 in terms of reserve funds. The harbor manager does feel that we will, in fact, still keep that number of reserve funds, which is 38, Kevin, yes? 48, which is 48 boats for reserve for the annually. There is a concern with just going to the monthly end of things, and that the 3-month is a better route to go with this. It not only allows better administration at the site, it also allows less movement amongst the boats and equalizes the playing field as well. There is some financial impact with this, obviously. So what normally we would bring in 21,600, we're looking at 10,800.
Am I the only one who can't hear?
Can you guys hear me?
We just lost you, Councillor Cole.
Okay. So there's a variety of recommendations, some of them just to clean up and move forward on the bylaw, and some of it is as to where the funding is coming from. So maybe I'll just leave it at that, and then maybe we can answer. Kevin is in the audience, our harbor manager, as well as Donna Moteeth is in our audience as well. So between the 3 of us, we hope to be able to answer your questions. Through the mayor, is there any questions?
I'll leave it for the councillors. I know we lost Councillor Cole, and any other councillors have any questions for Ms. Fortune? I just texted Councillor Cole. She said she can't hear anything. Yeah, we'll just give it 1 minute here, then we'll resume. What's that? Yeah, we're almost there. Yeah, please. Just a sound check there, Councillor Cole.
I just went away and came back.
No, it's all good.
Does it work?
You did very well there. We're almost in. So I just asked Miss Fortune. She just spoke to it. I think you heard most of it. We haven't asked any questions. So are there any questions that you may have? And no questions from any councillors. I just want to say thank you to staff. I know that you spent a lot of time on here, and it's just trying to really support those people who are down there in the harbor. And I know that we understand that it is tough times for them, and hopefully the 3 month I think is a fair change to get us through this 2020 zone, and then we'll reassess in the new year. Have you had any feedback, if I may, have you had any feedback with any of the user groups?
Basically, I've just told the user groups that you guys are discussing.
Okay.
It's really positive. We can say what any aspect of it. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
Council can't hear you, so you got to go to a mic.
We're gonna move around. Sorry, we almost made the whole meeting here. Did everybody hear my question? I was just asking the harbor master for any kind of feedback from the user groups regarding this possible change.
Yeah, so to answer that, of course, I've responded to all of the vessels, like the people that came in, that I'd hold back until you guys made your decision on what you're doing for the reserve, for the ones that were new. Some had already been previously charged prior to this. But it's all positive. Anytime you can get any type of rent relief or relief on this, it's of course positive. So if this is what you guys adopt, then I can go back to my reserve people and give them that discount. So.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
We can now, yes. Did I just lose her? Councillor Cole, do you have a question? She's in freeze mode. I want to. We did very well, bless you. Okay, we're going to get right to it, Councillor Cole. Do you have a question?
Nope. Just why am I disappearing?
I don't know. So we're not trying to punk you or anything here. We're just trying to get. Okay, so that's perfect then. If there's hearing no questions, and again, I just would reach out to staff and thank you for putting a lot of energy into this. And again, it's just trying to support that user group. So there are 5 recommendations. I know I won't get Councillor Cole to do it because we don't know if we'll lose her, but Councillor Hoare, if you don't mind.
I've got this. Okay. Moving recommendation. Oh, can we do them all together, Mr. Rotenberg?
We'll break them apart.
I didn't think so. Okay. So recommendation 1, that council directs staff to equalize any overall deficit incurred by the small craft harbor resulting from COVID-19 by drawing funds from the Harbor Reserve Fund if available.
Second by Councillor McEwen. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And recommendation 2, that council give Ucluelet Harbor Regulations Bylaw number 1276/2020 first reading.
Second by Councillor Kemps. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And recommendation 3, that council give Ucluelet Harbor Regulation Bylaw number 1276/2020 second reading.
Second by Councillor McEwen. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And moving recommendation 4, that council give Ucluelet Harbor Regulations Bylaw number 1276/2020 third reading.
Second by Councillor McEwen. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
And moving recommendation 5, the council directs staff to offset shortfalls to the harbor manager's revenues associated with the 3-month reserve berth fees set out in bylaw number 1276/2020 to a maximum of $4,860 by drawing funds from the Harbor Reserve Fund.
Second by Councillor Kemps. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, well, we got through. That was the longest one. That was hard. Okay, are there any other business? Councillor McEwen?
I just wanted to say thank you to staff for all those great staff reports. That really makes making the decision a lot easier when they're very comprehensive, like these ones have been. So thank you to staff.
And good use of your emojis there, Councillor Quall. That's question period, Mr. Rotenberg.
Nothing has come in.
Okay. And we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a safe evening.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye, everyone.